Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lubin Pampulov.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to announce the following two guests. One of them is one of the greatest sports commentators on American television, having been the voice for the US Open, Wimbledon, Roland Garros, and also having been the voice for the San Francisco 49ers, Ted Robinson. The other one is arguably one of the best tennis players of all times, having been #1 in the world for over 100 weeks and having won all 4 Grand Slam tournaments, putting him in a very small group of greats, including Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Rod Laver. In 1994, he started his foundation for education, the Agassi Foundation for Education, and has raised over $180 million since to help children at risk to get access to education. Please welcome Ted Robinson and Agassi.
Well, thank you all very much for welcoming us. You can understand, I'm sure, all of you, what a thrill this is for me, because we all strive to do something once really well in our life, right? Can we really excel in one thing? How often do we get to be and hear from someone who has excelled in 2 fields, to be a great tennis champion, one of the greatest in his sport ever, and then to take that very same success and you said it to me outside, Andre. Do something to help to do it with education.
Well, sure, but I tell you, one way to feel not so accomplished is to marry somebody way better than you. So, I mean, I thought it was. I thought I did a pretty good job out there, and then I met my wife, and well, I don't bring my trophies home because she brings her home, and it doesn't work out well for me at that point. But tennis did lead to my life's mission and purpose, unquestionably.
It is. And we will do that. We will talk an awful lot about what Andre has done. If you're not familiar, it's an extraordinary story. It's branched into new areas in the last couple of years that we'll hear about. One thing that I've heard this from the great champions like yourself that I've had the chance to work with in tennis through the years. The essential nature of this sport is problem solving. You're on the court and you're by yourself. Right? And boxing, even, we analogize a lot to boxing, but boxing, they go back at the end of a round to a corner, you get somebody whispering in your ear. You don't have that in tennis. You figure out how to solve problems by yourself in the middle of a match. And you've done the same thing, you've taken that to education, haven't you?
Well, no question. I mean, tennis is that, and it is different than boxing, because boxing, you not only are able to talk to your cornermen, right, but you can actually feel and probably smell one another. In tennis, you're separated, by 80 feet across a net, and what I do affects what you do. And I think the one thing every champion or every player that succeeds at tennis ends up learning is you don't have to be good at it, right? You just have to figure out how to be better than one person, and if you can do that over and over again, then sure enough you're going to be pretty darn good. And so that is problem solving, of its finest. Your opponent is a faceless opponent with strengths and weaknesses, and you have to be objective about your own, which I think carries over into life, but building teams around you that can help help you be more of who it is that you want to be. And you needed that on the court leading into a match, but in life you need that around. It's a privilege to be here, quite frankly, in the room with all of you, watching so many people care about the future of our country. And education to me has been my life mission. I've met with many educators since I've been here. I've met with investors since I've been here. I've met with innovators since I've been here. And all of you, we all have the same goal in mind, which is how do we kind of leave this world off a little better than we came into it. And I believe wholeheartedly that we can do that through education. So quite frankly, this room gives me hope that we can solve some of the daunting societal issues that do exist, in our country, whether it be medical or whether it be education. It's something I've given my life to, and I credit tennis for the platform and certainly for the experience that made me conclude that it is truly a crime to fail our future and not give them a future of their choosing.
Mm-hmm. So as we transform into that, I'm sitting here thinking your career, you played so well for so long. You ended your career playing against the players that are still going today at the top. You played Roger Federer, you played Rafa Nadal. But I can remember watching you and calling your matches when you're 18 years old and you have McEnroe or Lendl or Connors on the other side of the net. And let's face it, they're looking at you, especially a guy like Connors. He wants to rip your lungs out, right? and you stood up and no, I mean, I'm serious. I know Jimmy. He knows Jimmy. But that's, you grew up in front of a world. I mean, it's astounding to be 18 years old, to have the eyes of the world on you, and you found a way to beat that guy who at the time was the older, established champion. That's astonishing.
Well, yeah, I mean, you definitely have to be blessed with a level of right nature, born with something, and then you need to be blessed with a sort of a psychotic dad who nurtures that nature, right? So I grew up a lot faster than I wanted to, and unfortunately I did that in front of many of you. So at a time when I didn't know myself very well, I was being sort of told who I was. So that became the greater challenge than inside the lines, just trying to understand my connection to the game of tennis. It was, I don't want to spoil the start of my 2.5-year memoir that I wrote that took me 2.5 years of my life, but I really did hate what I did for most of my career. And, I hated it for a lot of specific reasons. I saw what it did to my family, the way I was engaged with it, the pressures that were put on me at an early age, getting sent away from home to an academy when I was 13, to being in this tennis academy where it was a bit like Lord of the Flies with four hands. I mean, there was truly no adult supervision, teenagers raising themselves. Your pecking order in life was about how you performed on the tennis court, and so your barometer for who you are and what you aren't was defined by the tennis court. And I took that stage of my life and started to rebel quite heavily, feeling that abandonment of sorts. And I took that rebellion right onto the world stage. So when I stepped out there against Connors, I didn't know who I was. I was 18 years old in front of 23,000 people in New York who loved him and called me a punk. And at the end of the day, hopefully they've reversed that a little bit. But in any case, I let it fly from a tennis perspective, but the hard part was keeping that balance with truly growing up in front of the world.
It's hard for a lot of us of my generation, those of you that are my generation, because we think back to Andre and we think back to that I know you're not thrilled with that campaign that came out, that image is everything. Because you sit here today and that's so wrong, right? It's all substance. Yet you had to live through that campaign.
Well, I was complicit in it as well, right? So here I was, a young man who brought something new to a sport. I mean, I didn't like rules of any kind. And when tennis tells you got to wear this and you got to do this and you got to do that, I completely did the opposite and felt good about it, continuing that sort of rebellion and getting offers to do all sorts of things off the court, and one of which was Canon camera, and that's who you're referring to. And while they make a great camera, they don't do a lot for your own personal image of sorts, I guess. But for a while, I was saying this line on camera almost like I didn't even know what was going on. I'm filming this commercial. It takes me 2 days to film all these different things, and all of a sudden the commercial ends with this one shot that took me about 30 seconds to film. I was just thrilled the day was over, and that was the phrase, image is everything. And I'm going, image is everything, camera company, that all seems to line up, but had no idea that I'd get pinned with that as I would come so close to getting over the finish line in all these Grand Slams that you were a part of as well, Ted, and failing to do so. So I quickly was going down as one of the great underachievers of all time, and being associated with that sort of tagline didn't make it easier, let me put it that way.
Yeah. And just a couple more on tennis here. One of the greatest matches that I ever had a chance to commentate on, you were part of it, and the ending didn't work for you, but it was about 4 nights before 9/11 at the US Open. You played Pete Sampras in Arthur Ashe Stadium, which is 22 or 23,000 seats, I believe. The match is 4 sets, all of them ended tie breaks. It was virtually flawless tennis by both men, and before the 4th set tie break, and I've never seen this moment ever, 23,000 people stood and applauded. And I remember on the air saying, this is 23,000 people saying thank you to the two of you before the match was finished.
Yeah.
In the heat of moment, does that register with you?
You know, there are very rare moments when you're in a zone where something like that registers. Unfortunately, so many things registered over the years when you weren't in a zone. Unfortunately, the ball was the only thing I wasn't focused on, and you're focused on a lot of other stuff. In that particular case, I'd never had a situation on a tennis court where everything was in focus, and all of a sudden, 23,000 New Yorkers just said, I don't care what you're focused on. You need to stop for a second and appreciate what this has meant. And yeah, I remember the hair standing on the back of my neck,
Yeah.
and I looked across the court at Pete, one of the few times I actually liked him on a tennis court. And we kind of had an interesting moment too, you know, looking at each other almost as if, you know, hey, we've done this, regardless what happens. Look, you know, anytime you can have this moment, it's pretty special. But the only thing I got to say louder than 23,000 screaming, applauding, cheering New Yorkers is 23,000 silent New Yorkers. Because from the moment they were standing up applauding, they went from that to, okay, we're done. Now we want to pick up right where we left off. And
That's right.
that was kind of an odd feeling, tossing the ball up and you could hear a pin drop in the same stadium that a second earlier was your ears were ringing.
Then there's one other moment I remember so vividly, and it ties into your academy in Las Vegas. You use the word respect a great deal as part of the mission for all your students there. And I thought an incredible sign of respect was 2006 Wimbledon. And you played Rafa Nadal. Now, Rafa Nadal at the time was, I think, 20, but he'd already won a couple of French Opens. People knew how good this young guy was. But here's Andre. You'd announced it was your last Wimbledon, and Rafa Nadal beats you. And at the end of the match, he went and sat down. And you stood up at center court and received the deserved ovation from center court. And I always have respected Nadal so much for that, for understanding to have the respect of that moment.
Do you remember any matches I won? Or
Fair.
I mean, I did have a few of them,
Yeah.
you know, but I tell you, watching that next generation, I was blessed to really be able to play through a lot of generations, as you alluded to, Ted, and I think one of the greatest joys I have in the context of my entire career, second to going to number one, falling to 140 in the world, and then at 29 going back to number one a second time and winning more at the age of 30 and above than I did leading up to 30, separate from the pride I take in what I learned through that journey, was being able to play in the generation that we see now, watching the likes of Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, you know, Murray I got to practice with, Djokovic I got to play an exhibition against once. You know, you look at these guys because they're not only such professionals, they're not only such great athletes, they're not only so good and make the game look so easy, they not only do things that we never did, but they do it with a great deal of respect for not just the sport, but also for one another, you know. They do it with a great deal of respect to the fans. I've never seen Rafa, as you mentioned him, never have time for a fan as he's walking off the court. I've seen him on the practice court where sometimes he's spent more time after his practice court just taking care of the fans and the kids and signing. I've never seen him not show respect to the media who was asking him, who wanted their time. He understood that it was important to the game and always gave time, and to the opponents. And I watch it now, and many times I just, with the way I lived and as competitive as I was and the lack of sort of context that I had in my own life, I always thought people that did that were, quite frankly, just bullshitting. You know, it's like, well, it was like, you know, okay, you don't really mean this. You're just playing like mind games with me right now because I'm miserable. I don't want to be here. But you're acting like this, you'd rather be nowhere else. So I put on the same charade. But these guys really do have a healthy context. Novak is an example. Djokovic waking up and brushing the court off of shrapnel, you know, from bombs dropping, you know, where he grew up just so that he could practice. Talk about people that have a context for life. So I have a great deal of respect. And you're right, I look back at Nadal with fond memories, one of which is certainly that one.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the moment. It's been about 20 years since your foundation started. Am I right? Was it the late 90s?
It was early 90s my foundation started. It led into education towards the late 90s.
Yeah. And by the way, if you haven't read Andre's memoir, Open, It's the most appropriate title, by the way, for a memoir that I've ever come across. It's spectacular. And just a couple of lines I pulled out from it. You wrote, I didn't transform. You critical of a lot of media people like us who would say, what a transformation. You said, I didn't transform, I formed. I thought that was a great line. When did that, and was there a lightning bolt moment when you're playing tennis and winning championships where you said, education is my passion?
There was a moment, but I tell you, the reason why I say I didn't transform, I formed is because I have this belief, quite frankly, that we're all in process. And I think it took me far too long to realize that. I don't care what you've accomplished or what you haven't accomplished, who you are, who you wish you'd be, what you think you are, what you're not. This is all parts of this journey that we go through, this thing called life, and we're constantly in process. And thinking about it any other way is it's a disjustice, and it limits who you are and what you're meant to accomplish in this world. And that's the one thing that occurred to me through my book is just how I'm literally in process, and tennis teaches you that because you have to learn from your failures and your successes. But I got into education because I was hit with this harsh reality that I didn't have choice in my life. I was introduced as the future #1 tennis player in the world from the time I could walk, and that's all I remember, and it's what I had to do. And then I got sent away, and pretty soon it became the only thing I could do because education wasn't a choice, and I resented all of it, and I thought winning was going to be the answer. So I did that. I won. I got to #1 in the world, and I still felt that disconnect, so much so that I was willing to go on a 2-year self-infliction process in my life that took me to rock bottom in more ways than we have time to even talk about today. But I remember at my lowest point, I was in Germany. I was with my coach, Brad Gilbert, who you know so well, and he's a real simple kind of guy, and he was able to rein in my emotional roller coasters and get me to focus on just one thing at a time. And then he was even struggling to do that. So he followed me into my hotel room after a first round loss where I'd lost more matches than I'd won that year, 140 in the world, and he locked the door and opened up a beer and said, we're going to quit or we're going to start over, but that's the choice that's being made tonight. And I'm not going to accept anything otherwise. And I remember never hating tennis so much as I did in that moment, looking out the window, seeing so many people in the traffic going in and out to the courts, back, this way, that way. And I remember asking myself, what do these people do and why do they do it? You know, and that was a real pivotal moment for me because it occurred to me how little we all choose in our life. I mean, we all can sit here and say, well, I'm here because I chose this, but we didn't choose where we were born. We didn't choose how we were nurtured. We didn't choose what strengths or weaknesses we have. We don't have the luxury of doing any of that, but that doesn't mean we can't take ownership of what we do have and can't find ways to connect with the life that we're living. And so at that moment, I made it my passion to find my reason. It's like I gave myself the ability to quit, and then I rebelled against myself and said, well, no, I'm not going to quit because it's not that easy. I'm going to find my reason. And it took me a while to find it. Epiphanies, for the record, don't change your life. I'll never suggest they do. But what you do with that epiphany on a daily basis has a profound impact on your life. And I remember watching a show on 60 Minutes, Michael Feinberg, Dave Levin, who I'll celebrate the rest of my life because of their impact on me with the KIPP program, Knowledge is Power. And I watched them roll up their sleeves, changing these kids' lives. And the one thing you recognize in them doing that is that they're creating real systemic change for children that have no choice in their life, except the difference between them not having choice and me not having choice is, you know, they don't have the luxury of their lack of choice bitching about being the best athlete in any given sport in the world. You know, you're talking about having a cycle of activity in their family. And so literally overnight, I took out a $40 million mortgage. I mean, call it like it is. I took out a $40 million mortgage. I got my charter's license in the 5th largest school district of America, and I took a shovel into a desert, and I hit caliche at the same time. So I took another few $1 million mortgage, knowing we have to get through the caliche under the ground. And my goal was to prove that we're failing kids, they're not failing us. And all of a sudden, tennis became the reason for what my real mission was. And all of a sudden, I got out of my own way, and I started this process. And I can go through the inspirations and motivations of what I went through as an athlete and as a person. But what I can tell you, it was absolutely the impetus to start this journey in the educational space. And then that's what led me. You know, I started my school in 3rd grade because, you know, I heard reaching a kid in 3rd grade is like a 2-minute drill in football. You know, you can march the field, you can score, but reaching them in 4th grade is like a Hail Mary in the end zone. You're going to barely reach any of them. So I started in 3rd grade, and within 2 years said, what am I doing? You know, I mean, the remediation process here is overwhelming. We need to go back and do K. You know, we got to start earlier. You know, if it's up to me, I'd be waiting outside the delivery room, right? So, but we have the. I mean, we all share the same passion, but we have the 5th largest school district in America, 330,000 kids. We're 50th in the country in kids we put into college. So, you know, fast forward a handful of years, our academy has graduated close to, you know, in the high 90s. I'll never be at 100% because I'm too tempted to take risk on children that society is so quick to write off. But at the end of the day, we've graduated, you know, to the high 90th percentile of kids we put into college, and I don't know. I do thank tennis for that, no question about it.
Yeah, yeah. You touched, I think, on a very salient point there in that Nevada, your home state, hasn't spent on education what you'd like it to, and you've backed up your commitment with money.
It's true, but listen, we're sort of preaching, if you will, to a wide audience here, and some of which are heavily involved in the financial side and recognize that the scalability and sustainability of something is not just throwing resources, right? Resources without accountability is a real problem. It creates entitlement, it creates dependency, and it undermines the very fabric of what it is you're trying to instill in these children, which is you can do this, you know, for yourself and of yourself, you know. So yes, it's a broken educational system. It's why we're here. It's why we need to innovate. It's why we need to do things. To give an example of my part in the process, through building this K through 12 for 1,200 kids, I raised about, I don't know, 185 million more or less of philanthropic dollars. Well, 1,200 kids on an annual basis, that's quite a good thing. 3,000 kids on the waiting list. So I'm sitting here going, you know, in the world I come from, that means I'm twice the failure I'm in success. That's great, we have 1,200 kids in here, but we got 3,000 on the waiting list. And by the way, if we took those 3,000 in, we're not going to have room for the next line of kids. So I started to think to myself at an early part of this process, what's the real scalability of this? I mean, what is it? Can we do it through legislation? Can we do it through, you know, private funding? What's the way to do it? And the good news is I recognized I'm not an operator and I'm not an educator. I'm not like, you know, many of you here. I'm an 8th grade dropout, you know, but what I recognize I am is a facilitator. I was able to take this dream, raise a lot of awareness, a lot of resources, and make this dream a reality in the fabric of these kids' lives. So as I looked at what the problem was scaling best-in-class charter schools, you know, and I'm not a proponent of just charter schools. I'm a proponent of anybody that knows how to educate our future. And by the way, the 85% of charter schools don't, because they're a mom and pop shop just like me, frustrated, unable to out-earn their failures, and I'm not interested in scaling mediocrity. So how do you scale this footprint for those that have a proven track record of being able to educate our future? And me, not being an educator operator, was able to recognize that the impediment to their growth is not the software, right? It's not the kids. It's you know, the technology is always improving. There's always ways to scale to the growth of these classrooms, but it's actually the hardware. They can't access public dollars for their facility. So as a result of not being able to access public dollars for their facility, they get their charter's license. If a kid the money will follow a kid to that charter, and now all of a sudden that school has the ability over a period of time to incubate church basements, boys and girls club, and scale. So I'm saying, well, geez, isn't this really an infrastructure issue? I mean, what if we could come to the table with the capital to actually build the facility, actually give the infrastructure, and relieve the overcrowded school districts where when kids leave, they're going to an environment where they're going to learn. It helps them. And by the way, it's not costing taxpayers anything. So that money falls to states. So you can build a $10 million facility. You have 800 kids in a state with 10,000 per student. That's $8 million of revenue on day one with a built-in wait list, right? So I'm going, wait a minute, there's an economic model to be had here. I partnered with Bobby Turner out of Southern California, who came into my life at such a blessed time, and we sat together and hammered out this business model. How can we no longer count on philanthropy to scale? Because guess what? Philanthropy ends when philanthropists run out of money. or when philanthropists change their focus of what they want to do. And how long are we going to sit around and wait for the government to do this? They've already proven that it needs to be changed. It's like having the fire department fight fires 3 days a week. It's like, well, what if my house burns on that other day? Am I covered? So we can't do it, but we can still innovate in this country, which is one of the reasons why we're all here. We went to the private sector and sold a business model that simply said, don't give us your money, invest your money. Guess what we're going to go do? We're going to go build a school for somebody that knows how to educate. And guess what? We're not going to play landlord because nobody gets rich in the tenant-landlord relationship except a landlord. We're going to take that and we're going to redirect it and flow for you through the tax-exempt bond market an ability to purchase back this facility for a number that satisfies a like-minded investor. An investor that says, I realize we have daunting societal issues, but I'm not going to give away my money. And I don't want to do that. So if we can create what I call that realist, that person who's willing to give their money as an investment with a return that satisfies them to know that it's actually scalable and sustainable. And the operators have loved it. So it took me 14 years, and I'll stop being so long-winded. It took me 14 years to build one school in Clark County in the most economically challenged area for 1,300 kids. In the last 4 years, we have built over 70 schools, deployed over $650 million, and by the way, have close to about $1 billion more to spend currently to help facilitate the growth for those who know how to educate our future. So as a result, we all need times like this where we can come together, put our minds together, put our ideas together, and really figure out sustainable solutions.
That's amazing. So that one school, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to add this too, because when I was selling this damn thing, right, I'm going, okay, I found the Chinese to be the most sophisticated in the early part of this process. And let me tell you why. So I'm selling this fund. I was meeting from the CIC, China Investment Corp, and I'm walking through the merits of this investment. I'm walking through the mitigations of risk that are in place, and they're going to invest. And those of you that don't know me, and my book will disclose that, which is I have a real thirst for knowledge, and I'm not scared to ask dumb questions. This is one of these times where I just stepped up and I asked a dumb question. I said, why is China interested in investing in a real estate infrastructure fund focused on education in America? And then I went, why did I just ask that? They said they were investing. And yes. He looks at me and he says, with all due respect, Mr. Agassi, you are indebted to our country to the tune of almost $2 trillion. There is nobody at this table that's going to be alive to pay that back. We are relying on you and your country to educate your future so that your children's children can pay us back, and you're failing to educate your children, so this is a hedge against the bet we've already made in you. I looked at him and I said, did you say with all due respect or with all disrespect? But it's true. We have been too slow to getting ahead of this curve on multiple ends, and that's why I'm thrilled to be here as a giant effort from all of us in our lives to make time for things that you never know where it's going to lead. So this really gives me a lot of hope.
Dumb questions, by the way. You'd be a hell of a sportscaster. But they generally breed smart answers. That's the good thing, like you just got. So that's an extraordinary accomplishment. Where are the schools that you have now built?
Oh, we're everywhere. We're from Florida to New York to Philadelphia, all throughout Texas, Tennessee. Won Race to the Top Dollars with Arnie Duncan. Race to the Top Funds to Arizona, California, Nevada. We're probably in about 19 different marketplaces. The metrics to quite frankly are real estate value versus per pupil allocation. And the only place the model doesn't really work is where there's high real estate and low per pupil. So we'll never build a school in San Francisco or probably heart of Los Angeles because of real estate and per pupil allocations. But with that being said, it works in many other many other ways. And then we're not done there. That's the infrastructure. We still got to facilitate for these operators technologies that allow them to be very efficient with how they educate these kids. And that's where I'm like-minded. I mean, we got educators here, we got innovators here, we got investors here, and I'll raise my hand to 2.5 of those. I don't know if I'm an educator. I mean, I learn a lot more than I teach. I assure you that. But I'm definitely one that wants to look at it outside the box and has figured out a small way to do it. And I'm definitely an investor. I've put my money behind very few things, but not just my money, also my time. And one of the things that I've done that's relevant here at this conference is Square Panda. And I encourage every one of you to look at it. It's early childhood learning, teaching literacy, how to read and how to do it sustainably, how to do it efficiently, how to do it in classrooms, how to do it individually. We have a booth out here. We're, again, China is leading the way, which I respect as it relates to the impact of this. It's a tablet accessory. It's tactile. It's software driven to the 95th percentile, and it can be scaled all across this country and all across school districts. I did case studies with this in my own school. I saw the difference of how fast kids can learn with this versus without. The impact of this has dyslexia, reading implications, flagging that at an early age. We all know how important that it is. Language implications. It has seared reading, technological advancement. What it does to these kids' lives, I saw it. And when I saw it, I put my own money up, but I did something that was even more, remarkable than that. I gave my time and my energy to it. I'm so proud, and Brand, I'm so proud of what it's doing right now, that all of you need to hear it, you need to be aware of it, and you need to go kick the tires, and you need to figure it out, because I've already gone through that process, and we're at our infancy, and it's going to have a huge impact as all of us need to come to this table and take our appropriate seat to solve for some of these issues.
That's great. What's the proudest moment you've had in this education journey of yours for all these years, from Agassi Prep in Las Vegas through these charter schools? What's the proudest moment you've had?
Tomorrow.
Yeah?
Tomorrow. I mean, I don't know if it's the way I'm wired, and maybe that's why tennis came a bit more intuitive to me from the standpoint of capacity for pain, or if it's what I did for my whole life that has taught me, yesterday doesn't matter. If we don't live today right, our future doesn't matter either. So there's something about living on the edge between where I am today and what needs to be done. And I'm most proud when I'm living profoundly in that space. I mean, there's a reason why our front window is bigger than our rear view mirror in our car, right? I mean, where we're going is way more important. What's behind us is less important. But what matters right now is getting there. And so I kind of live pushing. I mean, watching the first graduating class, I can point to moments, on a tennis court. What's more powerful, winning a Grand Slam or deciding to recommit yourself to a sport that's been so good to you? My greatest moment might have happened at my lowest moment, sitting in that hotel room. So it's hard to answer that.
Yeah. Would it be moving to have somebody from that first graduating class or second or third that comes to you someday and says, Andre, I want to help you. I want to help pay this forward, because there'll be a time when you'll need that, right?
Yeah, well, helping me is less important than helping the cause, right? I mean,
Right.
what we're trying to do. So I guess a real interesting moment would be if one of them was sitting in this audience right now and goes, hey, I figured out something smarter. It's like, great, I would love to see. I guess you could ask, well, what really defines success? I mean, defining success for me with my educational journey is watching these kids not just graduate, not just go to college. Some kids aren't meant for it. Some kids need vocational deals, and some kids need to focus on other things, no question about it. But truly success in any case would be coming back to your community and changing that cycle of activity, breaking that downward spiral for the next generation. I mean, if we can create and instill that, a bit like we do with alumni in some of our great universities, right? I mean, we ask them to come back. We ask them to to open their purses and their offices, and to those that have. We need to do that in our communities, and that's what would be success for me.
All right, Roger Federer's 35 and a half, and he's still winning. This is extraordinary. When you watch Federer, are you blown away by what he's doing now?
Yeah, I think I'm going to make a comeback. Yeah, no, it's. I retired at 36. I played Roger at 35 and a half in the finals of the U.S. Open, and I have a full appreciation for what he's doing and certainly how easy he makes it look. So, yeah, I marvel at him along with everybody else.
No, that's amazing. When you think that, as you said, you had your greatest, probably you say your greatest run was in your 30s?
Absolutely. I won more in my 30s than I did before.
Right,
yeah.
right. And you look at what these people are doing today. They're stretching the boundary of what tennis, the mortality rate, haven't they?
Yeah, they're learning to invest in themselves, which is a great thing to see. Back when I played, we just played because we were worried about, the next ranking week, or I was one of the first ones that sort of looked at my body as sort of I had a use-by date. I felt like, attached to my body, and I had to choose wisely, and I wanted to extend that date. And so I made sacrifices. I pulled out of tournaments. I trained during certain tournaments. I played others, but it was always about doing just what I needed to keep getting better, even through my 30s. And, hopefully something's been learned by that. Certainly sounds like Roger, in talking to him over the years, he kind of always had a kind word to say to me about what I did, making him feel like he can do it, and I told him to set his bar higher than whatever I showed him, because he's headed into uncharted waters, and he's proven it now.
Well, if you're not a tennis fan, understand that even to this day, those of us that talk about tennis for a living measure anybody's return of serve against Andres. How does it measure up against Andres?
Well, yeah, a few of them are better, quite frankly. I mean, there's a lot of technicality to returning a serve. I had to return aggressively because of the way my body was structured, the way my game was built. Some of these guys now can be just as offensive as I was, but they also have the ability to be incredibly defensive if they wanted to on the return. Their pockets are bigger. The game's gotten better. I marvel at watching that evolution. I always took a lot of pride that if I got my racket on the ball, you were going to know it. That's all.
Well, there's a line in your book that I think is a wonderful way, as we wind down here, this discussion of your devotion to education. And you wrote this. These are Andre's words. A boy who despised and feared school became a man inspired and re-energized by the sight of his own school being built. You wrote that in Open about the vision of your academy in Las Vegas. That's incredibly moving.
Yeah, it's incredible that academies would define my life on both ends of it. My academy I got sent to that shaped my trajectory of my life, and the academy I built, which has basically changed the trajectory of my life in a whole new direction. So, yeah, there's a lot of contradictions I think we all have to reconcile in our own life. I encourage everybody to do it soulfully with themselves, because when I came to terms with my contradictions, there were probably some clear answers to it, and profound sensibilities, and sharing that was just one of them.
Well, it's an honor, again, a champion in tennis, and in my life in sport, a long, long time being around a lot of great players, I've never seen anyone who's been able to take those same skills and channel it into something even more worthy than education, a champion in education as well. So, Andre, thank you for sharing all of that with us and allowing me this.
Thank you, guys.